Can games accurately represent war? War is an insanely popular setting for games. The Call of Duty series, for example, has made $11 billion in revenue, and the Battlefield series, while not as big, has brought in similarly huge numbers. Clearly, these games aren't going anywhere, and it's easy to see why. Who doesn't want to be a hero? Who doesn't want to save the world? Games about war are easily accessible and a lot of fun, but that's a fantasy. In the real world, wars aren't fought or won by solitary soldiers. War is messy, and every year it gets harder to know who the enemy actually is. But video games make it seem simple by presenting us with obvious antagonists and simple objectives. War games want you to believe that they take place on real battlefields, and the army even uses war games as a recruitment tool. But shouldn't games that depict war come with some level of responsibility? Soldiers come home with PTSD, civilians die, money and resources are squandered. War is definitely not fun. So why don't games about war reflect this reality? And is there a way that games about war can be fun and meaningful? But before we go any further, we need to understand how war games got to where they are now. Today, there are two big kinds of war games: top-down games where you're a powerful general, and bottom-up games where you play as a soldier on the front lines. But the road to these distinctions has been a long one. There's an Indian board game from the 6th century called Chaturanga. It's like an early version of chess, and its name translates to 4 divisions of the military. In Chaturanga, you are the general, directing troops from a safe distance. You look down on the battlefield from above and you see everything. Early war games were built on this top-down view. That's chess. That's Battleship. Top-down games are also how armies used to plan for war. Generals often repeated famous battles on maps and boards. This was also the basis for German military training. That's why US Naval War College professor Milan Vigo says the Germans invented and developed the modern war game. Although abstract and removed from the personal reality of war, these games were good at simulating the large-scale strategic thinking needed to understand wartime tactics. These traditional war games were missing just one thing: shooting. Sure, units died, but it was in silence and in abstract metaphor. Pieces were just swept off the board. Fast forward a few decades and advances in technology give us the first-person shooter. The FPS was popularized by Doom in 1993. Its player was on the front line of the battle against the demons from hell, but a front line nonetheless. In the first-person shooter, you're no longer just the general looking on from above. You're a soldier on the front line, so it's a trade-off. Do you want perspective or action? And clearly over the last 2 decades, lots of people chose action. So the most popular variant of the war game doesn't look like the traditional top-down war game, which still lives on in games like Warlight and Crusader Kings. Modern first-person shooters are now our main reference for games about war, but is there a way that they can still be as instructive as those earlier war games? To be clear, no war game will ever be a completely accurate depiction of war. But while older war games were good at simulating high-level tactics, the modern first-person shooter has the opportunity to illustrate some of the complexity involved with the soldier's viewpoint, way better than those early games allowed. And full disclosure, I'm not a soldier, nor was I ever one, but some of the following research was gathered from people who did spend time in actual combat, and I think what they have to say is valuable for people interested in designing modern war games. As game designer Clint Hocking once quipped, "Why isn't Call of Duty about duty? Why isn't Medal of Honor about honor?" Part of the problem is that war has changed so much since the first war games. I mean, it's changed so much in the last 20 years. It's now messier. Staged battles are a thing of the past. Armies don't attack in turn. We aren't always even fighting armies. It's a mix of individuals, organizations, regions, and nations. These large-scale challenges are also a problem for war games. The army of one in first-person shooters is not an accurate reflection of what war looks like, especially in 2015. But games can reflect some of the complex experiences of soldiers during war, and some games are already doing this. And if we use some of the following ideas, we can address the realities of modern warfare and make interesting games. The first big military reality that games could address is the importance of teamwork. The lone wolf fantasy of the first-person shooter is just that. A fantasy. Armies are all about teamwork. U.S. Army Brigadier General Jim Chambers says, "I think almost everybody in the military thrives on building teams. Teams are how armies get things done, but they're also how soldiers stay safe." That's why Marine Lance Corporal Anthony Andrada says that the one-man army stuff would never work in real life. Sure, it's fun to single-handedly save the world, but that's as realistic as defeating aliens in outer space. Games can encourage teamwork. This might look a lot like Evolve, but instead of fighting monsters, you're working with your team to accomplish specific objectives. Besides, teamwork emphasizes the tactical side of war. You can't just shoot everyone up when you have to worry about the safety of your teammates. That brings us to another thing to improve. War isn't about non-stop action. It's mainly about tactics. Marine Lance Corporal Nico Requesto says full blown-out combat is not a common thing, but this is exactly the kind of gun-blazing action that first-person shooters specialize in. Tactics aren't just for generals at a safe distance. The strategic thinking of early war games also applies to soldiers on the front line. Some games already do a great job of favoring tactical decisions over non-stop action. Top-down strategy games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, and Advance Wars favor positioning and strategic movement. They emphasize an understanding of the terrain, your soldiers, and the enemy in order to make an educated decision about how best to approach each mission. War games could do the same, favoring strategic movement and decisions amongst teams instead of easy run-and-gun battles. But there's another way to prioritize tactics over action, and that gets at the third aspect of the soldier's experience. Ammunition is finite and scarce. It's actually really hard to carry bullets around. They're heavy and their size adds up. A magazine for an M27 rifle only has 30 rounds. Riflemen only get 7 magazines. You can't just pick up extra bullets during a skirmish. Marine Corps Commandant James Amos made a training video for troops telling them to save every round and every gallon of gas. Armies have finite resources and shooting like crazy wastes them. Games can reproduce this reality by imposing realistic ammo limitations. Basically, this would sacrifice wall-to-wall action with strategy and tension. Do you shoot now or save the bullet for later? This is what makes Resident Evil so much fun to play. It makes you think about the resources you can carry around and how you'll use them. These mechanics reward skill and strategy. Also, what do you do when you run out of bullets? Trying to get through levels with next to no ammo would be an incredible challenge. This would make for amazing war games. You might be asking yourself why any of this matters. War games are fun fiction. Who cares about accuracy? Sure, games are fiction, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask anything of them. Films like Saving Private Ryan and Full Metal Jacket exist alongside films like Rambo and Inglourious Basterds, giving us diverse perspectives on the same topic despite being under the guise of fiction. Games like Arma do exist to help diversify our perspective, but are only a small piece of the pie due to their enormous complexity and are too often swept under the rug to niche corners of gamers' libraries. The world is a complicated place, and the best art and games reflect that. By integrating mechanics that reflect actual warfare, we can make war games that are more relevant, complex, and ultimately important. So what do you think? Should modern war games play out as the reality of modern warfare actually does, or is fiction enough for these trying times? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you all next week. Last week we asked the apparently audacious question if Link could be female. Let's see what you had to say. Asivio and a bunch of others of you had a very similar complaint. This was by far the most popular comment in the comment section, specifically that Link has to be male because it's tied to who Link is, and it's just really important, and that Link is always male. It's tied to who he is as a character. And second is that if we're going to do some sort of female Link or female character, we should do a Zelda spinoff or a female Link in a separate universe. So first things first, we shouldn't really be so scared of changing things up. If you look at female Thor, for example, the first inaugural issue for Marvel Comics has sold better than past Thors have, so clearly there's an audience for it. And by that logic, we should never change anything, right? So we should say that Mario should never be in 3D because platforming Mario is somehow the quintessence of what it means to be Mario. And second, and this is the most important thing, it goes back to the distinction I made in the episode between singular characters and honorific characters. Singular characters are ones who are consistent across all different universes, such as Luke Skywalker, versus honorific characters characters which are more of a title, and that is more flexible in terms of who can bear that particular title. So if you look at The Legend of Zelda, for example, Link has been all different types of things. He's been a boy, he's been a man, he's been a Deku, he's been a Goron, he's been a wolf, he's been a fairy. So what you're telling me is that Link can be all of those things, but he can't be a woman. So if that's what you're saying, then just say that. But don't try and hide behind Legend of Zelda lore as an explanation for why we shouldn't ever have a female Link. Young Gotak Boy takes issue with this idea that men want to play as female characters, citing information that BioWare released that only 20% of players of Mass Effect 3 actually played as Femme Shep. First of all, that's not 0%. It's obviously not 50% either. Not to mention, I cited other evidence as well, some that was just released at the Game Developers Conference that suggests that women, particularly young girls, like seeing their gender represented on screen, whereas young boys don't really care so much. They care about whether or not it's a good game. Regardless, there's more information that I'll link to in the description that suggests that male players of World of Warcraft gender swap 3 times as much as female characters do. So there's plenty of evidence out there. HydroTool 2001 points us to a couple of mods where the roles of Link and Zelda are actually reversed, and a couple of you in the comments actually suggested that if we're going to have a female Link, then we should have a female Ganon as well, that we should just switch everything up. So it's nice to see that modders, as they often are ahead of the curve. Couple small notes before we go. First of all, a big thank you to Faye Davis for tweeting that photo of you watching the episode with your daughter. She's very, very cute. Also, there's a female Link game jam that I'll link to in the doobly-doo. Apparently, the very idea of having a female Link has inspired game designers to get together to try and make games about it. And one last thing, thanks to Kiva Bay, who over the last couple episodes has been tweeting cartoons that she's been drawing of me responding to comments and adding her own commentary as well.